record this. So there we go, we're recording. Okay, so we did our black and our white. Now we're doing our middle value for our 9-point value scale. And once we get this nice middle value established, then we can go ahead and we can look at either side. So we could jump into the darker end or the lighter end, it doesn't really matter. So I'm gonna go to the lighter end, and I'm gonna look at the white and the middle gray and try and represent a value that's the halfway of those two. So there is my middle value for that. Then I'm gonna go between these two, white and this one right here, and this is gonna be half of those two. There we go. And then half of the middle gray with this one right here. And there we go. Perfect. All right. I'm actually going to darken that middle gray just a teeny bit because I feel like it needs it. All right. Cool. So now we've got that end done. Now we're going to come over here and take black and the middle gray and go into the one that's in the middle and try and give halfway between those two. Awesome. And just by putting in this value scale, it's really going to help us in the long run with our demo today. All right, now I'm gonna go halfway between these two, those two right there. And the cool thing about value scales is that you can go back and forth. So if you make something too light, you can darken it up or vice versa. So don't feel like you can't change these things as you're going along. So you can see I'm going back down to the light side, adding a little bit to these. There we go. And then the last one is, this is as dark as I could get, which is very close to black. We're using a charcoal pencil, so this is going to be just under that. So they're gonna look similar, but this one should be just a teeny bit lighter overall. And you see I do have to shade over this a few times in order to make that happen. So I'm not pressing down as hard as I can. That way I can build it up a little bit more gradual. And now I'm drawing my dividers. There we go. All right, so you can see in our, I'm looking in the camera how this reads, and I feel like it shows a nice gradual transition all the way across. So now I'm going to pull this down a little bit. Does anybody have any questions about the 9-point value scale? So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. You know, you're going from black and white. You're trying to get seven more gray values that fall in between the extremities. Okay, so looking at our paper, what I want you to do is, I'm gonna scoot my camera over just so you can see I have a finished light and shadow established here with our box and our sphere. So we're gonna go ahead and draw lightly those two forms. So I'm gonna start with my sphere, and you're just gonna freehand it, and it takes me a couple times of going around and around before I land on the shape that I want. So there we go. And then once I do, I can I can get a little bit darker with my line so that hopefully you can see it. Here we go. So we got our ball. And then to do the box, what I like to do is draw the top of the box first. So of course I'm going above the ball a little bit. So I'm going from here up to here. And I'm going to put a corner about right there. And then I'm going to come down past the ball to put my next corner. I'm going to go over here and then come over here. So I'm really drawing like the top of the box. There we go. So you can see the top of the box. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to bring down the front edge, the front corner here, and it comes down not all the way to the bottom of the sphere, but we're looking at about 2/3 of the way down on the sphere is where it's going to come down. If you were to check the bottom of this edge and run across here, you still have about 1/3 of that ball left underneath that line. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this line really light. I'm going to carry this angle that we started up here. I'm going to carry it down here. We want this angle and this angle to match. So they are parallel. And I'm going to draw it light because I'm going into the ball. And eventually I'm going to erase that. So if I draw it light, it makes it easier for me to do that. I'm going to do the same thing here. Carry this down. This line is parallel to this line. So these two are parallel. These two are parallel. This angle and this angle are matching in terms of going up on a slant, where these are matching the side actually of our page. They're that straight. Now I can take my eraser and get rid of these two lines that are in the ball. So not only does it make sense to draw through a form that's covering over something, but when you're drawing a box, in this instance, because that's covering over, sometimes we just go right up to here. But if we carry it through, you actually get that perspective a little bit stronger. And then what we can do here is we can bring down a parallel line as well to that front edge, this one, and that side edge. And you can see that I'm ending it very similar to where I ended this one, except up a teeny bit. And then I'm bringing my angle. So this angle matches this angle on the top. Okay. So now you can see this angle and this angle are similar. This angle and this angle, these are all similar as well. All right, we are ready to go. We got our box and our ball. So we're gonna do some shading, and I'm gonna come down a little bit so we might not, we can still see our 9-point value scale, so that's good. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put a light up here, a light source. So it's a little oval with some lines coming off of it. So it looks like a spotlight, okay? And I draw that up there just for my purposes. So you're putting it up there for you as the artist to know where is the light coming from. Because right now we're drawing a demo and you guys don't have these objects in front of you. You're following my drawing. So because I'm also not working from a still life, I'm using the light and shadow principle and my ability to be able to draw simple geometric forms to create this. So if you put your light source up here, it will just help convince your mind, where do I want the light to hit and where do I want the shadow to hit? The next thing we're going to do is we're going to divide our sphere in half, meaning as something goes from light to shadow and it's round and it's curved like my hand is moving, this eventually is going to go from light into shadow and there's going to be a divide. So that divide is actually going to go across the form in a curved manner. And then we're going to shade that entire side of the ball as a value. Now, how dark do we want to make this? Not too dark. We can darken it up later. Right now, we're just trying to get rid of the white of the paper. So that's our goal, that's our objective, is to just unify the whole area. So we just did that. The next thing we're gonna do is create the shadow on the box. So this side of the box is gonna be in complete shadow. It's further away from our light. So we're doing the same thing to the box over here that we did to the ball. There we go. All right, so when you squint your eyes and you look at your drawing or my demo that's on the screen, it really helps you to sort of start to understand where the light and shadow are placed in this drawing. And also, as the light source is coming down, how this part of the ball and this part of the box is going to be hitting the light, or the light's going to be hitting it directly. So we're going to call the light on this side of the ball direct light, and we're going to call the light on this side of the box direct light. So the word is D-I-R-E-C-T, direct. So if you want to jot that note on the side of your paper, put that, you know, the word direct light, and then I'm going to put some initials in here before we finish our demo. So the next part of our light is called indirect light. So I'm very lightly shading the top of the box. That means that this part of the box is in light, but it's not in shadow. So in other words, it's going to be not as intense as this, but it's going to be lighter than any part of our shadow. So another place where that indirect light is going to hit is just before we get to that light and shadow divide. So I'm just going back into that direct light and adding some value right next to that edge that we drew initially. So this is going to remain the white of the paper, and so is this. The thing that's missing right now before we add some value is what we call cast shadows. So what we're going to do for the ball is we're going to put a line that goes like this. It's round, and it's going to go all the way down to the bottom of the box. And then from the bottom of the box, we're going to also put a curved line going to the ball itself. So now you can see how the ball is casting a shadow on the table that it's sitting on, as well as on the side of the box. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect the cast shadow and the value of it with the shadow that's on the ball. So once we do this, you can see that the shadow on the ball and the cast shadow are one shadow passage. So they're not separate from one another. They're actually part of the same, even though they have different components and they look slightly different. For example, this divide where the shadow and light meet is going to have a soft edge, and we call this the core shadow, so it's going to be darker. Whereas the cast shadow, even though it is also darker, like the core, it contains a hard edge. And part of the reason why the cast shadow contains such a hard edge is because the cast shadow is coming off of the form. So that's the best way to describe it. Here, it's going to be soft because it's a gradual transition from light to shadow. Where here, it's going to remain hard on the edge because this is reflecting the actual form itself. It's a cast shadow. It's being cast off of the ball. There we go. And then the box needs a cast shadow too. So we're going to run a line like this, and we're going to run a line like that. And then we're going to do the same thing that we did over here. We're going to fill this in, and we're going to connect it right up to the shadow on the side of the box, so that there's no separation between this cast shadow and the shadow on the box. In fact, it's the opposite. They're connected. It's one shadow passage. So there we go. All right, so everything's lightly shaded in. Now we can add a little bit more value. So I'm going to go right here to the core, as we call it, and I'm going to start to press down just a little bit harder. And remember, I'm using charcoal. And I don't want to press down too hard too soon, because you know what'll happen. It'll get too dark too soon. It'll be harder for me to lighten it up. So as I'm shading, I'm making sure that I don't cover the whole side with my dark value, because I want the back of the ball, where the ball ends and the cast shadow begins, I want this to remain slightly lighter in our shadow. And the reason why is because there is light coming off the table that's bouncing up onto the ball on the back. And that light is called the reflective light. So in other words, the light that's hitting the table is reflecting onto the surface of the ball. Now I'm doing that thing that I talked about where I want the edge to be softened so that it looks more like a gradual transition. I don't want it to feel like a hard edge like the cast shadow feels. So by softening that edge, it looks like it's going gradually from light to shadow on this rounded form. And I'm carrying that core, darker core of our shadow towards that reflective light, but then I'm not pressing down as hard as I get closer to the edge of the ball on this side, so that this will remain lighter. Now, this light and this cast shadow are blending in, so I need to separate those. So I'm going to go into the cast shadow, and I'm going to darken that cast shadow up a little bit. So by making our cast shadow darker, it makes our reflective light appear lighter. There we go. Awesome. And I'm going to go back over here to the box, and I'm going to start to darken the shadow closer to the edge of the form. So this whole side is in shadow, we know that. But where the indirect light and direct light edges meet the shadow, that's where we need to add the core. So even though we're on a box and not a rounded form, the core still exists. So now we have to find out, well, where is that? Well, it's where the light and shadow meet. And by darkening up this box over here like we did on the ball, and then carrying it towards the other side of the box, we will then be able to establish what we call the reflective light. So that reflective light is really starting to happen. The reflective light is going to be towards the back of our box back here. But in order to make that look lighter, I'm going to go back into our cast shadow and start to shade it and darken it up. The cast shadow always appears a little bit darker closer to the form. And then as that cast shadow starts to get further away from the form, it's not as dark. So this cast shadow right here on the ball is not far away from the ball at all. So it's going to appear dark throughout. But on this cast shadow, because it extends off of the box and it gets a little bit longer out here, you can see that further out, we don't have to darken it up as much. But closer to it, that's where I'll press down a little bit harder. There we go. So I'm going to put in my abbreviations or initials, and we'll talk about direct light, indirect light, core, reflective light, and last but not least, the cast shadow. There we go. All right, looking good. I like it. Okay, so I'm gonna put the initials CS with an arrow pointing to this area down here. This is the cast shadow. I'm also gonna put CS over here and point to this part right here off of the ball. That's our cast shadow. Then, of course, because this is lighter back here, we're going to put RL with an arrow to this lighter part. That's your reflective light. We'll also put RL over here with an arrow to this lower part of the box. So you know that light is bouncing off the table and bouncing up to hit that side of the box, that part of the box. Now up here, we shaded this in, but not too much, because we call this the indirect light. So I'll just put IL. And then the side that's facing us or next to the ball, that's the lightest. That's catching the light the most direct. So we call that DL. And not only is that direct light, but so is the top of the ball. So I'm going to put DL right there. And then we need to establish the core, which is just the letter C, C for core. That's this part right here, this dark band. And then there's a core over here on the box. And then last but not least, the last thing that we need to indicate is our indirect light as it appears on the ball. And that's between the direct light and the core. So that is IL, indirect light.